Good morning everyone, I am Ariel Manuel, one of the reporter for today, and I will continue the discussion of Ms. Sayaf in problem-solving strategies. But before that, there is another question here. How many squares of any possible size are there on an 8 by 8 chessboard? The answer is not just 64, it's a lot bigger. Para masagot natin ang katanungan, kailangan nating tandaan ang step na binigay ni Polias. Ang kanyang unang step ay understand the problem or intindihin natin yung problema. If you understand the problem, that is good. If you are not sure what is being asked or why the answer is not just 64, be sure to ask someone. It is clear that you want to draw a picture for this problem, but even with the picture, it can be hard to know if you have found the correct answer. The number get big and it can be hard to keep track on your work. Your goal at the end is to be absolutely positive that you found the right answer. You should never ask the teacher, "Is this right?" Instead, you should declare, "Here's my answer and here is why I know it is correct." So how can we solve this problem? We can solve this problem by trying a simpler problem. Polya suggested this strategy. If you can't solve a problem, then there is an easier problem you can solve. Find it. He also said, if you cannot solve the proposed problem, try to solve first some related problem. Could you imagine a more accessible related problem? In this case, an 8 by 8 chessboard is pretty big. Can you solve the problem for smaller boards like 1 by 1, 2 by 2, or 3 by 3 and so on? Of course, the ultimate goal is to solve the original problem, but working with smaller boards might give us some insight and help you devise your plan. That is Polya's step number 2, make a plan. Problem solving strategy number 6, work systematically or maging mapamaraan. If you are working on a simpler problems, it is useful to keep track of what you have figured out and what changes as the problem gets more complicated. For example, in this problem, you might keep track on how many 1 by 1 squares are on each board, how many 2 by 2 squares are on each board, how many 3 by 3 squares are on each board, and so on. You could keep track of the information in a table. Mas mapapadali ang pagsosolve kapag gumamit tayo ng table at ililista doon kung ilan ang 1 by 1, 2 by 2, at 3 by 3 ng isang chessboard. Problem solving strategy number 7. Use manipulatives to help you investigate. Sometimes even drawing a picture may not be enough to help you investigate a problem. Having actual materials that you move around can sometimes help a lot. For example, in this problem, it can be difficult to keep track of which squares you have already counted. You might want to cut out 1 by 1 squares, 2 by 2 squares, 3 by 3 squares, and so on. You can actually move the smaller squares across the chessboard in a systematic way, making sure that you count everything once and do not count anything twice. Para mas maintindihan natin, panoorin natin ito.
Here is a partial solution to problem 3 squares on a chessboard. We're going to be using two different strategies here. First, we're going to pretend like we're using manipulatives, and also we're going to work systematically. Now, this is a partial solution because I'm only going to determine how many 2 by 2 squares will fit on the chessboard. And so if I were to cut out a 2 by 2 block, as I did here with this blue square, I'm going to move this and drag it across the chessboard on the left and keep track of all the different positions that it can be placed. The first position I'm going to place my cutout manipulative is in the top left-hand corner. Then I'm going to move to the right. and I'm going to move one square at a time, each time keeping track of the new position. Okay, so we've reached the end. So on the top row of the chessboard, I have discovered that there can only be 7 2x2 squares. Okay, so now continuing with my systematic approach, I'm gonna go back to the furthest left-hand portion, but now I'm going to move down one square. Now from here I have a choice. I can continue it across as I did above, but since we've already done that for the top row, nothing is going to change for the bottom row. So we can assume that there's 7 squares going across on this row. So now instead I'm going to move in the vertical direction, so I'm going to move down. Okay, and again I can go across on this row. And so let's just continue down. So we've reached the bottom, and we see that we have 7 squares in the vertical direction, which is the same as in the horizontal direction, which makes sense because we're dealing with a square. And if I would have continued my process across, I could have filled in all these spaces here with squares as well. Okay, so instead of having an 8x8 board of 1x1 squares, I have a 7x7 board here with 2x2 squares. And since I work systematically, I've exhausted all the possible placements of my 2x2 square. And so 7 times 7, we get 49, so we know that there's 49 possible 2x2 squares on an 8x8 chessboard.
Now, how many squares of any possible size are there on an 8x8 chessboard? Let's see. There are 204 squares on an 8x8 chessboard. That's the end of my report, and Ninya will continue the discussion. Thank you for listening.